To get started, I'll do a brief round of introductions on who's joining this webinar from our side. I'll kind of give you a high-level agenda of what we plan to cover. We'll chop through that the best that we can. As always, if you have any questions or comments or jokes or anything like that, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll take those as we go. We've carved out about 20 to 30 minutes. I think we have about 20 minutes of material and leaving 10 minutes for Q&A. We don't necessarily have a hard stop, so we're happy to kind of hang out if the dialogue's very fruitful. But that's the agenda for getting going. So for introductions, I'm Michael Rentz. I'm the CRO, so the Chief Revenue Officer here at Gnosis. I run the whole commercial side, been here 6 years, pretty much since the beginning, and spend most of my time now talking to folks like y'all that are on the call, prospective customers, current customers, understanding what's happening in our market and making sure that we are communicating everything it is that we do in a way that's understandable and digestible to the market so that they can best fit within how we like to build products and deliver those services. So looking forward to this webinar. I'm joined by Nick McGrath. He's our VP of Sales Engineering, which is somewhat of a hybrid role, sits between our engineering side of the business, which is where all of our account management, our solutions engineers are, and the commercial side. So he built a lot of the products and helped create a lot of the case studies we'll walk through, and he'll cover most of the back half of this webinar. And we're also joined by Hudson Joyner, our CFO, as well as our Chief of Staff, jack of all trades for anything here at Gnosis, deals intimately with everything cost related, among other things here at Gnosis, and we'll be able to plug in any gaps and address any questions that may come up that will be that I or Nick won't be able to answer. So with that being said, we'll jump into the material itself. So again, appreciate everybody joining. As the title states, how top BCOs will regain cost control in 2026. Somewhat of a prediction, not claiming to be able to see the future, but as always, leaning on what we are seeing with our current customers and how they are utilizing, our products, our services, and our perspective on innovation to take control of their cost exposure or their cost basis within their transportation teams or their supply chain team. So in order to do that, I'll kind of set the stage foundationally. I won't dive too much into a general overview of who Gnosis is. I think everybody either knows that, or there's plenty of ways to inform yourselves on who we are and what we do. But I'll start with the foundational component, which, as always, and if you joined our AI webinar a few weeks ago, it'll look very similar. It has to do with data. From our perspective, everything we do has to start with that foundational layer of data. We've worked very hard to make sure we have what we call operational grade data, not to limit us to anything but operations. We can obviously populate executive level BI tooling or retroactive performance data, but have really tried to make a name for ourselves on creating, an operational grade data set, building innovative exception management tools on top of that data, automating some of those decisions that need to be made on it, and then ultimately giving better visibility, no pun intended, into cost as it's exposed across the supply chain, and how we can rein that back in and then drive ultimately better business outcomes from the logistics side of the business. If you've listened to anything we've said lately, specifically in 2026, we've leaned heavily on an idea that we're calling data sovereignty. So what that means is that whatever data provider you work with, but specifically for Gnosis, working with somebody that owns as much of the data as possible, is an originator of the data. We've always said that we're not a data aggregator. We do not just regurgitate milestones one-to-one. We pull data from as many different places as we can, and where we have the opportunity to partner, we will push to be the originator of that data. And from that perspective, that's what we call sovereign data. That should be intimately felt from your organization as well, in that most of the data that you have within your systems or within your organization is also sovereign to you. And the true unlock is when we can combine those two different data pools or data lakes, our data that's sovereign to us, your data, we can really start to unlock, a very powerful suite of tools and services that not only help you manage the exceptions with the containers or the inventory in transit, But ultimately, what this presentation will be about is how do you get more control into that cost, eliminate some of that cost, optimize the system for that cost, and then potentially even work on designing new networks or new strategies at the highest possible level to continue to put yourself in a very advantageous position from a cost basis perspective. A bit more about the data. We don't want it to just be a title with data sovereignty. I think we've made some meaningful impacts in the industry, specifically with the Hapag-Lloyd partnership, in that all inbound freight that demurrage into the U.S. on behalf of Hapag-Lloyd is paid through Gnosis in partnership with Pay Cargo. We are now the originators, as recognized by the FMC, with things like container availability at the terminal and the subsequent last free day. Building dynamic flows to maintain lowest possible latency. That's really the key that picks the lock with operational grade data. We measure our latency in hours, not days, and we're going to continue to maintain that standard. And then ultimately making sure it's complete and accurate. And we've always said that from the beginning. If it's not 98% complete, 98% accurate, 98% low latency simultaneously, it might as well be 0%. And that's the framework and the fidelity we hold ourselves accountable to unlock any and everything that we do, and hopefully our customers do as well. And I think having that foundational data layer as broadly as we can have it allows us to build configurable tooling, but be configurable in general. What I mean by that is, obviously, if you've worked with Gnosis, the platform itself is configurable. We can create as many different credentialed user logins, custom dashboards, reports, etc. But one main takeaway from this presentation is that we are configurable from a strategy perspective. And what I mean by that is we're going to align to you, your team, your leadership's vision with regards to where you want to win and where you want to limit downside risk. So for example, if you're a port-to-door shop, we have plenty of tools and services and experience to fit within that architecture. If you're port-to-port and manage your drayage in-house, we can fit within that. If you have a medium to long-term vision of wanting to transition from that, plenty of familiarity with that as well. So one thing to keep in mind when we talk about configurability, it's not just the tooling or creating custom endpoints with an API. It's fitting with and understanding your strategy and how your logistics and supply chain teams want to win. And that's really the proper framework. I think that you'll see that pattern kind of emerge as we talk through these case studies, is we really want to embed ourselves with you and your teams, understand that strategy level plan, make sure that we have the sovereign data set necessary, both our data and your data, to unlock that tooling, that exception management, those automations, and then surface any other opportunities for us to improve your cost exposure. And so next slide, Nick. As always, we've tried to distill this down into three main buckets when it comes to cost control. And there'll be a correlation here with time to value. And what I mean by that is, as we progress through these products in sophistication, and it takes a little bit more time to put ourselves in a position to make that impact, but we do have some products that we can deploy immediately that's going to have an impact. So those three buckets are first and foremost control and prevention. That'll be relevant for things like demurrage and detention alarms, helping you better with exception management, and just being proactive with keeping your cost exposure down. Second is incurrence validation and audit. Once we have that operational grade rigor, we're operating, to the degree to which we all agree is the mutual objective, then we can start to audit against those, whatever's been bargained for. Make sure that we're not overpaying, make sure that vendors are billing us according to what we are expecting, and make sure there's no slack in the system. And then third is cost and network optimization. Once that's in place, somebody's been a customer for a little bit longer than a year or so, we start to surface visibility into some of the items that take up most of the P&L, whether that's ocean freight itself, being able to compare a strategy of a low-cost provider versus service, and where customers can start to negotiate better terms that are going to have a meaningful impact into their overall cost exposure for that year. So that's basically the three buckets that we've broken it down into. And we're going to work through some of these case studies. Nick's going to show you a demo on some real life examples, hopefully let our customers, speak on our behalf. But those three case studies are listed here. So we have a demurrage and detention alarm case study, a freight invoice audit, and a network optimization focusing on uh, inventory to cash cycle optimizing transit time. So again, real world examples, leaning on all the data that we've been able to pull from these customers and these case studies, and we'll talk through this. So first and foremost, we're going to jump right in to the demurrage and detention alarms. This has been our bread and butter for 5 to 6 years. If you have demurrage and detention in aggregate now, the last 5 to 6 years, we've been able to reduce our customers' D&D by 85% within the first 90 days. So a very quick and powerful time to value. Again, the key caveat is to make sure that you do have D&D. We can't reduce something that isn't there. And there's some nuanced examples to that. But in general, and we track a little over 10 million containers a year, we reduce D&D very, very rapidly. It's a combination of our sovereign data set and ingesting your specific unique commercial terms within your contracts that you've negotiated. A combination of that and a very simple alarm system on top of it checks that first box with regards to the first bucket on just being proactive and managing any hard asset-based cost exposure from how the containers move. So with that, I'll pass it to Nick, and he'll actually talk you through some of the more specifics and get into the demo.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Mike. So for this case study, like Michael mentioned, we've been dealing with demurrage and detention alarms, or we've built them out for well over 5 years now. So we have a lot of great examples and customer case studies of how they've been able to decrease their demurrage and detention within a very short time frame. So for this initial first case study, what we did is we took 10 of our core cargo owner customers who have worked with us for well over a year or several years, and who implemented demurrage and detention contracts with us. So that's kind of the first step of our demurrage and detention alarms product, is our customers provide us what their negotiated rates and free times are, and then we implement those. So our engineers take that in whatever format they're provided in, typically Excel, and then they implement that into our database to actually calculate what those last 3 days are, and then any costs that are incurred. I'll say we've seen all sorts of different types of D&D contracts. It's not always as simple as this carrier, this lane, I get this many free days. I've seen some where there's such thing as like combined free days, where detention starts upon discharge and it's combined with demurrage. We've seen it all. We've seen where each and every container has its own contract. So we built out a very dynamic and flexible database architecture to be able to incorporate however our customers negotiated those free time contracts, to then implement them so that when they're in the platform, they can see in rank order, and I'll demo this in a second, what containers are at risk of demurrage or detention and what should I focus on today. So the result of all of this is that D&D is very quickly reduced very considerably. What we found is that it's 85% reduction in demurrage on average within the first 12 months, and a lot of that is achieved within the first 4, and then 64% reduction in detention as well. So a ton of cost savings opportunities, no matter how much or how little D&D you currently have, that we're more than happy to help our customers with. So to how this looks in the platform. So where I'm at in the platform right now is we have a dedicated alarms page within it. So we got demurrage alarms, detention alarms, as well as a few others around holds and diversions and delayed shipments. These are really subsetted views of the containers that we track for our customers, where I log in and I see my demurrage alarms right here, and it tells me immediately these are the containers that are at their final terminal. So when we track our customers' containers, we know whether it's going to rail inland via an IPI move or not. So we'll know exactly what that final terminal and port is supposed to be. And then once it arrives there, we'll be getting the data around that container directly from those ports and terminals and rail carriers. So I can see right here, we do a red, yellow, green light system, where red means I'm past my last free day. Yellow means I have today and maybe a couple more free days. And then green means I'm still on the clock, but they're a lower priority because I have more free time. This is where a lot of the terminal operational grade data that we get starts to surface. So one, we provide 2 different last free days. One is what we calculate the last free day for demurrage or detention to be based off of our customer contracts. I'll get more into that in a second. but we also provide what the terminal is actually telling us the last free day is. So if you exceed your last free day and then you pay for demurrage and then that good through date gets pushed, that terminal last free day will move. But the Gnosis contract last free day will stay persistent because our customers will always want to go back and see what was my last free day, how much in demurrage or detention did I incur, and let me use that to validate against my invoice for that container. But we also will show if there's any holds on the container or whether that container is available for pickup and even the location at the terminal. A lot of operational grade data that really helps drayage coordination and helps get those containers picked up as fast as possible and on their way. And with all that data, obviously it's great to, well, actually, let me touch on the actual customer contract. So what I can do is I can click in and I can see the actual contract details for this container. I know it might be a little small here, but I can see under the contract details section of my container pop-out, this is where we start to house the actual contract parameters. So I can see that I have, for my demurrage free days, since it's a rail container, I have 2 calendar days at the rail terminal. Then once it outgates, I have 4 detention calendar days, or excuse me, working days as well. And then we have the charging tiers right now. So for the first 5 days of demurrage, it's $150. And then thereafter in perpetuity, it's $225. So one thing to note is by default, even if our customers don't have any custom contracts, we have a full database of all the tariff rates for all the carriers and all the lanes, especially in North America, of what those tariff rates are, so that even if we don't have a contract implemented, we'll still tell you what those rates will be if they were booked under tariff or spot. But once we implement those contracts, all this will be superseded by what your negotiated rates or free days are, and then that's what our system will use. So very straightforward, very clean and easy to see exactly what do I need to prioritize. And we'll even tell you, hey, if this one's not picked up today, what are my costs tomorrow if nothing's done, so I can prioritize based off of expected cost. All right, Michael, let's move on to invoice auditing.
Okay, so just to make sure, that's the first bucket. So cost and prevention, a very quick time to value. And as we start, our relationship with our customers, we realize a lot of those folks, those inbound, outbound, international logistics managers, are buried with a lot of that type of work. So not only are we going to save money there proactively with something like demurrage and detention, we're going to give them that time back. And so then the natural evolution of that is, okay, what else can your most valuable resources, your people, do to think critically and help drive business outcomes? So if we improve like the operating efficiency in that first bucket, the second bucket is to make sure that we're getting what we bargained for. And something like auditing, to hold your vendors, your partners accountable, to make sure you're not being overcharged and it's being as the contracting is as efficient as it could be. The next piece is auditing against those contracts. So again, kind of to peel back the layers here, for us, it's been interesting as we have, thousands, millions of data points now, and doing this, we found that 85% of all invoice discrepancies are due to the underlying logistics milestones. And so what that means is even like a third-party invoice auditing company would need our data, our native data set, in order to audit against your contracts. They may know it's supposed to be $250 a day, but they do not know when the container was made available, what the last free day was, et cetera. Therefore, we have that native data set. We have the users, the people that are actually currently manually auditing those invoices in our environment. And now we can introduce and implement tooling to help automate that, which creates unbelievable savings almost immediately. So with that, I'll pass it back to Nick to kind of talk through this real case study.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So the way I think about it is like typically there's 3 reasons that an invoice is incorrect. 1, the wrong contract or an incorrect rate was applied. 2, this invoice has already been paid. So this is a duplicate invoice, or it's not even my container, like shouldn't even be there to begin with. Or 3, like Michael mentioned, the underlying logistics milestones are incorrect, which is messing everything up. And that's what we found, that 85% of the issues within the invoices is a milestone issue, where it's not an issue of like, is it $200 a day? Like everyone knows my detention contract is $200 a day, but when did it outgate and when did it empty return? And those milestones feed what the last free day is. And then that's what's used to actually calculate how much in detention I'm responsible for. So with one of our first customers back in 2023, they subscribed to our detention and our drayage invoice auditors. And these are some summary statistics from the first year of how much in savings did we find. So I think one key thing to note is that, when these errors occur, they are pretty significant. The average amount of savings per error is in the hundreds of dollars. So it's all about finding those needles in the haystack because they are large in magnitude from a cost perspective and can yield hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I would say the ROI is obviously will ensure you get savings from auditing these invoices, but also from having confidence that you're not overpaying. How do I know that I'm not overpaying? How do I know everything is correct? And when my CFO asks me, what controls do we have in place before paying a vendor? It's very comforting to say, well, Gnosis has all our contracts and has the underlying logistics milestones to audit it in 3 dimensions instead of 2. So these are a lot of savings that we've seen from customers and we're seeing across all customers. This was just for drayage and detention. We also do it for ocean freight, transload, chassis, any invoice around the ocean container. Our system is devised to house that invoice and actually audit it. So Mike, unless you have anything else to add, I'll hop into a quick demo.
Yeah, as we, it's again, like a recurring pattern is our customers come to us with like a very annoying problem on its surface. And then once we solve that and give them their time back, it unlocks like a more business aligned and business critical operational gain, which I think Nick will talk through with auditing is like once we relieve them of the burden of actually having to manually audit these invoices, we could start to calculate things like accruals, forecasting, landed cost. And even one thing that kind of caught me off guard was the ability to pay vendors quicker and then get a preferred customer status, negotiate better terms. So there's like a compounding impact to having the trust and the accuracy with something like billing that makes a meaningful business impact. So Nick, with that, jump right into the demo.
All right, perfect. So let me zoom in just a touch here. So this is our FinOps environment, FinOps short for financial operations. It really consists of 3 core tiers. One is invoice auditing, so getting all the data around the invoices, ensuring that it's all correct. The second is doing accruals on that data of, hey, what costs do I have coming down the line right now? What am I already incurring that I need to set funds aside for? And then 3 is landed cost, transportation cost analysis of, hey, Gnosis, you have audited all my invoices, you know all my rates, you know all the milestones. How can I apply these charges? 1, to the container that they're applicable to, but then 2, to the goods inside the container to then add to the value of the goods to get to my landed cost in addition to tariffs and duties and whatnot. But first, to touch on the invoice auditing piece, we subset each invoice type into its own bucket within the environment. So while they look and feel very similar, each invoice type has its own parameters, its own milestones, its own contracts. So we prefer to subset it out. I'm going to be demoing this from a drayage perspective. So I can come in, I can see all my outstanding invoices. One of the underappreciated things about how we do this is Gnosis's flexibility of receiving these invoices. So we're EDI integrated with a lot of carriers, whether it's ocean or drayage, to get these invoices. We also have our own templates that the carriers can fill out and submit it. Or if the carriers have their own invoice templates that they use already that are consistent, our engineers will build logic around those to then ingest those invoices in a standardized format so that no matter what carriers you use, they will all be uploaded in real time to your invoice audit environment, and you can see all outstanding invoices regardless of carrier in one place. So the workflow is very easy. I can see all outstanding invoices. I'll click into this one to see exactly what's going on with it. I can see what containers this applies to, and it makes it very simple. I can see what was submitted versus what was expected, And then I have a workflow of whether I can dispute or approve it. And I think this helps a lot with accessorials. So like an example that we frequently see is like maybe an overweight charge was applied when it shouldn't. And that's where we can get the feed of what the weight was for the container, and we'll know whether it's a 20 or a 40, and then what weight actually determines whether it's overweight or not. But the workflow is simple. I can come in, if for the ones that are correct, I can quickly approve them. Anything that's incorrect, there we have a reason code, and I can quickly dispute it, and you can see it's disputed now. And then from a workflow perspective of actually getting stuff paid or getting stuff disputed, from a dispute perspective, what we were able to do is actually create an email up between you and your carriers and say, hey, these are the ones that I'm disputing. Here's the reasons why, please adjust or please provide additional evidence if required. Because sometimes, the accessorial is very warranted. It's just additional proof is needed or whatnot. So the goal is to help automate that exchange of information and that coordination between you and your carriers. But going back, we have automations to help, expedite things. So you can see here on this invoice, this one has been marked as ready for payment, and everything's been approved because there are no discrepancies between any of the containers and any of the charges. I can click in, I can see, yeah, the overweight all checked out, the chassis fee checked out, the fuel surcharge, boom, it's all good. Many of our customers say, hey, if everything checks out, just approve it, and I want it flowing straight to accounts payable and getting it paid. Other customers say, hey, I want a little more autonomy. I want that human in the loop, and I still want them to manually approve it. And we can do either or for y'all. We can configure the workflow exactly how y'all want. And then what happens once it's actually fully approved, we generate kind of what we call accounts payable output file or a remittance file or a batch file, whatever y'all call it, where we transpose all this invoice and container data in a workable format that our customers can then send to their, or actually will directly send to their accounts payable team to then upload into their payment system and actually get those invoices paid and closed out. So it's simple. You can see the invoice number, the amount, the GL accounts, the cost centers, et cetera. These are, while they're similar across customers, everyone has a different format, and we can easily configure this for y'all to then get those paid. So that's the invoice audit workflow. What that, like I was alluding to earlier, what that can unlock is data around accrual. So I think from a demurrage and detention perspective or any accessorial perspective, I think this is very helpful, where I can see in Gnosis, we know exactly what containers are incurring, let's say, detention or that charge and have not been invoiced for. So we can create a bucket for that. We can also see which containers you've been invoiced for and haven't paid yet. So we may need another accrual bucket for that. Likewise, for what's been disputed and not paid or sent to AP, et cetera. And at the end of the day, the goal is to make it as easy as possible for y'all to say, hey, to my finance team, this is the total amount that you want to accrue and set aside for our transportation team for these specific charge types, whether it's ocean, drayage, detention, chassis, whatnot. We had one of the first customers that we implemented this for. They were spending days and hours on doing this every month. And then when we put this together, they're like, y'all just made the easy button. So we call it internally our accrual easy button because this just takes a second to go to it and get the number you're looking for. And then on the landed cost piece, obviously conceptually, it's if we know what goods are inside the container and the value of them, we know how much you paid in ocean freight and drayage and detention. All that can be summed up into a total transportation or a total landed cost at the container level. And then what can be done there is it can actually be subsetted down to the goods inside the container. So this is where different customers have different methodologies of attribution of, hey, I want my costs assigned to the goods inside the container based off of volume. So maybe the volume of that item in the container, or maybe the value or the weight or any other metric. That's where we have flexibility. And then we can tell you, what your unit landed cost is, what the transportation cost, the share, et cetera. This is the fun part. This is where we have all the data, and how can we best arm you to use that data from a finance forecasting perspective and a monitoring perspective. So I'll pause there. Mike, anything to add?
No, really great stuff. Thank you, Nick. Some administrative. I know we've already gone past the 30 minutes, so I want to be mindful of everyone's time. We
Sorry.
have one more case study to go through, and we're actually going to show a new product that I don't think anybody's seen yet. So I think it would be fun if anybody wants to stick around. If you can't, we'll share all this in a variety of different formats. And as always, if you have any questions or want to learn more, you can reach out to us, and we'd be happy to do an even deeper dive into these things. So just a break there. And before I set the stage and kind of tie this together, there was one question, Nick.
Yes.
Can the D&D alarms be set up for containers going direct to Mexico?
Yes, absolutely. It's any ocean container going anywhere in the world. We can apply a contract to it, and we'll know when it discharges, when it outgates, and what that free time is, and give you an alarm for it.
Okay, good deal. So moving right along. Again, so we've already talked through control and prevention with the D&D alarms. Nick just finished up with incurrence validation and audit, in the FinOps suite. And it's when we started at Gnosis, I think we used to think a lot about like what annoys a logistics manager. And once we started to solve those problems, we started to think about who annoys a logistics manager. And most of the time that's finance. And so a lot of those products, specifically what Nick just demoed, is communicating that information from an impact perspective to those stakeholders internally that you ultimately, whether directly or indirectly, roll up to, which is finance. Now, the third bucket is cost and network optimization, which is probably the sexiest component. After about a year or so as a customer, with access with our data, your data, getting a very granular view on like your cost exposure and aligning that to your strategy. Again, mentioning if you're moving port to door or you want to transition to port, or really drilling into those SLAs and where you're being taken care of or where some of the gaps can be so that you can negotiate better contracts on the ocean side or whatever carrier it may be. That's where we really start to move into more like business operations and how logistics teams and supply chain teams can really drive more of that C-suite down, MBOs, those objectives, top line growth, cash efficiency, cost reduction, de-risking those things. And so this next set is truly driving those things, something like inventory to cash ratios, or having better visibility into negotiating more efficient contracts, always balancing cost versus service level, things like that. We can give you granular information to really set yourself up better from a network optimization perspective. So I don't see any more questions, so I'll pass it back over to Nick to kind of talk through this case study, and we'll keep rocking.
Yep, perfect. So basically, when it comes to improving transit times or goods to cash, there's really two main vectors to do that. One is operationally, and that's well within our CLM platform of visibility and knowing where containers are dwelling. So going back to the demurrage example, what's that port that needs to be picked up? What's gated out that needs to be returned, or what's still at origin that got rolled, and what's not getting on the rail? All these junctures of the container's life cycle can be monitored to then speed up for your specific lanes and get those goods to the warehouses or the customer faster. And that's the first vector. The second one is, as Michael was talking about, network optimization. So doing, reconciling and looking at my network, looking at all my transit times, what was promised by the carrier, what was actually received from that ocean carrier, and then are there better alternatives that I should be aware of? And then being, data driven in the pursuit of making changes and having confidence in what you're doing. But from a demo perspective, this is a new product that I believe we released yesterday. Shout out to Ray who just released this, but we have a new benchmarking tool. So I know this is probably small. I'll zoom in a bit here, but really where this sits is the intersection of our customers' data with the global, I call it the Gnosis universe of data across all of our customers, anonymized. So we've done a really good job up until this point of saying and showing to our customers, here's what your transit time is for this lane. Here's your port dwell time at this terminal and whatnot, splitting up the container life cycle into any juncture that they want. But what our customers have really been asking us for is, all right, I love that I can see that my transit time is 30 days, but like for other customers on that same lane, what does it look like for them? Are they getting 28 days or are they getting 32? And obviously we would never compare customer A to customer B, but we would compare the customer at hand with just the broader population. So this is kind of where this is starting to materialize. What what I can do is I can see here, I can choose the origin that I'm looking at. So I'll just choose Ningbo, and then I can choose a specific destination. So let's just do Long Beach. And what I can see is I can see the carriers that move on those lanes. I can see through our partnership with Zanetta, we get short-term rate contracts or visibility of that. So we can see if our customers have provided us what their ocean contracts are. We can tell them what the rate difference is between their rate and then what the broader market rate is as well. So whether they have a good deal or whether it's a little more expensive. Obviously, it's not that simple. You have to account for transshipments and service levels and whatnot, but that's at least a good starting point. And then also, what is the transit time that we're seeing? So I can see here that maybe it's 23 days that this customer is seeing, but the market is 18 for that ocean carrier, and it's actually taking a little longer than expected. So we can visualize this where we do the 4 quadrants, where if you're in the top right, it's a little more expensive and a little slower, and the bottom left, it's faster and cheaper. So what we can do here is actually add in buttons of of all my rates, of all my lanes, which ones are kind of the lowest hanging fruit that I should go and say, hey, I want a different agreement here. I want to change something up. And we can do that right here for y'all and see, what the rate difference is and what the average transit time difference is. And then vice versa, which ones are looking good, which are the highest performing lanes and whatnot. So there's so much more to be done on this front of empowering our customers to compare their data against the broader network. And no one knows how to do this better than our customers. And a product like this is a direct realization of customers telling us what they're looking for. So always want to hear more on that front and get y'all's feedback on stuff like this whenever you want. So
yeah,
Mike, anything to add?
No, just touching base on the case study. It's, how a lot of the times inventory to cash, goods to cash is more impactful from a cost savings than even like the hard asset savings of demurrage, detention, accessorials. And we obviously carrying costs are expensive, definitely more so the last few years, especially with tariffs, your exposure there. And so being razor sharp, again, with the business units adjacent to you that you work with. So how are we ordering? How are we fulfilling customer orders? How intelligent are we being about that? Are we defaulting to the mean and what we would call the flaw of averages and attaching just a generic transit time for all my different lanes to the same PO? Is there room for improvement there to have better granularity and better visibility, not just to the transit or to the exception with the container, but to the cost exposure relevant for that? And so being able to give visibility of that, and ultimately most people are, for import into the US, are buying FOB. Those goods are showing up on your balance sheet as soon as the vessel sells. Being able to minimize that carrying time and converting that to cash sooner, again, that's dependent on commodity and what exposure you want to take with regards to a customer experience. But generally, we're able to optimize that for you. And so that's the final frontier. And then finally, how do we equip you to go into something like contract negotiation season as we're all approaching? What advantage can you have to know how you can negotiate better SLAs and how you can balance that trade-off of cost versus service and start to have your cake and eat it too? It's okay, I'm a low-cost shop, but there's some areas of service that I know I have an advantage in. I have the data to back it up. Can I negotiate more advantageous terms to continue to, push the envelope and better optimize for the overall business objective? So I hope we covered that in that last bucket of cost and network optimization. That's all we had planned to present today. We went 11 minutes over, so I apologize for that. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll answer them in real time. If not, like I mentioned, we're happy. We're going to distribute this in a variety of different formats, but as always, please reach out to us if you have any questions or you don't believe anything we're saying or you want to learn more. And we will all be at TPM next week. The RV will be on the promenade this year. So we won't be off campus down in the parking lot. We're actually up where all the containers are. That's the main nexus of where we will be. We'll also have a booth and a meeting room, and we'll be all over the place. We have 15 or so people there, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. If we have not yet scheduled time, please reach out. We'd love to get some face-to-face with you while we're at TPM. But appreciate everybody joining. I think we do have some more questions. We do. Question. Can you set up benchmarking against internal metrics as well as external? Example, internal lead times versus actualized transit times in order to ensure lead times, let me see more. In short, lead times, I can't see because of the zoom on my product, are regularly reviewed. Nick, you want that one?
Yeah, certainly. So I think that typically falls within our like rate management product, but that's perfect. I agree, Brian. That's, we're monitoring these lanes. What the next step is, what was promised for internal metrics, lead times, transit times, and then how are they performing against it? Because just saying the transit time is 35 days, it's like, all right, well, is that good or bad compared to what? And that compared to what is where we want to fit in and intertwine customer data, and then tell you all exactly what you need to know and maybe the occurrence of shipments that go beyond that amount or whatnot. But short answer is 100% that's exactly where we want to go with this.
Good deal. Great question. Any other questions in the chat? I don't see any. I'll wait a couple seconds. All right. Well, again, thanks to everybody for joining us. We appreciate it as always, and we'll look forward to seeing you, whether it's at TPM or virtually or wherever it may be. And so please feel free to reach out if you got any questions, and we'll see you soon.